So thank you everybody from Upland Fair for putting this together, for inviting me to speak. It's special. It's, I imagine, a lot of work. I would never do it. So it sounds like a crazy thing to do with a lot of logistics. As you'll see, I didn't even put together a PowerPoint because I cannot emphasize this enough. I really didn't want to. And I'm not very good at it, and I'm not sure why. I think we've all been taught by people who just stood in front of a classroom and every once in a while wrote something on the board, which I also won't do, but so it goes. What we're going to talk about is, I described it as selling life to people who want to die, which is a pithy title I came up with because Saki gave me like 10 minutes before he asked me to put something together so he could put it on some type of advertisement. But what I want to begin with is the idea of kind of how it all ends, right? Where do you ultimately want to get to in any type of conversation like this? Because when you work with somebody who wants to die, whether you know about this in advance or whether you discover it, right, the idea is that ultimately you have to be shooting for something. And I think that sometimes we don't necessarily know what we're targeting, what we're trying to end with. So if anybody has ever heard of, there's I guess some type of consulting expert. It's like a good title because it doesn't mean anything. But there's a consulting expert named Simon Sinek. He's a TED Talk speaker, and he described being at a event that was kind of a high school event where military recruiters from the different branches of the American Armed Services came to recruit high schoolers to join the military. A Marine Corps representative comes up, no PowerPoint, no presentation, and he says, "No, I don't see it. I'm looking around the room, I've been sitting at the back, and I don't think anybody here has what it takes to join the Marine Corps." You will be challenged to the very, very brink of your emotional and physical and mental capacities, and I just don't think anybody here has what it takes. But if you think I'm wrong, I'll be sitting at the back, right? And then he walks off, right? And it created a particular sensation, right? And it does. If I were just to ask what is the word you would qualify that as, you would describe the sensation of being someone in the audience. Anybody have a
Challenge.
challenge? Okay. The word that I thought of was intrigue, right? It's an intriguing presentation. It's a little bit of a mystery. There's a little bit of a sense of adventure, like what the hell is this going to be? But I'm kind of pulled towards it, right? Maybe I can do that particular thing, and it'll draw people, right, who are interested in enough to try to delve into something difficult, right? But it's not begging you, it's not demanding to you, it's not presenting something, right? It's trying to intrigue you. And so that's how I think the story ought to end, right? In terms of what you're trying to generate, you're trying to generate something that seems appealing and intriguing versus something that's stale about, here are the reasons why it might be worth living, or here are what other people have done, or here's a reason to hope. Hope is sometimes really important, but it also can be kind of limited and kind of cheap because it fades, whereas intrigue, oftentimes you can keep on doubling down and people get that dopamine hit and keep on wanting to return because they're intrigued. I think another thing that you want to bring to it, because what you're selling, right, as opposed to, a person sells a car, a person sells a house, a person sells some type of product, the relationship with that person ends the moment something is signed, right? When I bought my house, I never expected, unless there was a problem and I needed some guidance, like how does the AC work, my expectation is that I will never speak to you ever again for the rest of my life. I don't want to. I'm not sure why we would have any connection whatsoever. And the same thing with many of the products, other than I'm kind of attached to this product. I buy it from Amazon, I like it, and so I'm going to keep on buying it. It's a fairly impersonal sale. But when you're selling intrigue, right, you're selling a particular connection, and they ought to be just as interested in you as you are of them. And in fact, they are, right? Everybody search each other up online. You want to get a sense of the person. It's a mutual interview. They want to understand you. And so I think that there's something that you ought to present. Oftentimes, and I would say every one of us has been in this situation, whether you're pursuing the field or have been in it, where somebody asks you, why do you want to do what you do? Or why do you do what you do? Or why do you continue to do what you do? And so I think getting in touch with that particular perspective, why you are invested in this particular field, is important because a lot of people have certain preconceptions about why that might be. And depending on the attitude and personality of whoever you're sitting with, will definitely have an attacking attitude, because you get that too. What I would say for me is like this. I was once interviewed by the LIU Brooklyn program when I was applying for a doctoral program, and I'm 22 years old, and they asked me that question. I'm sitting in front of 3 different professors. It felt like a very unfair way to interview a 22-year-old. And so they asked me that question, why do you want to do and engage in this particular field? And so I answered, I'm the youngest of 4, and I came from a very supportive family. I came from a family where if I had some type of difficulty, they were interested and they were invested. If I was struggling, right, they wanted to attend to my emotion, and at the same time, they never let me off the hook. Right? If there was something that I was struggling with, they compelled me to learn how to do it. Right? So the sensitivity came with also an investment in skill. There was an interest, and they were very unimpressed. Right from their face, I knew the interview was over. And they had said, how could you possibly understand and resonate with the experience of somebody who's struggling if you felt like you came from a supportive family? Right? If you came from a supportive family, like how would you possibly get it? People come from negative families. I didn't even remember what I answered because the whole thing felt immaterial at that point. But to this day, I feel like they're wrong. Right? The idea of it being a detriment to come from a supportive family seems kind of bizarre to me. Because otherwise you don't necessarily have a clear model for what you're trying to shoot for. And I think in addition to trying to deal with somebody's difficulties and challenges, thank you. In addition to trying to, in addition to trying to deal with somebody's difficulties and challenges, I think you have to present a particular vision. A vision for how things could be, otherwise you got nothing. Right? They're attaching to a kind of an assembly of little techniques and little interventions, but there's not a model for thinking, and somebody who wants to die has a strong model, right? Which is that life sucks and life is painful and I'm suffering, and I see no real rationale for engaging in this, right? Their perspective is way more intriguing than living at that point, right? And so the idea of being able to embody a model that provides both a certain sensitivity, but also the idea is that you're going to learn something that you've never learned, right? Because I've learned it, right? I've learned it experientially, right? And so while so much of DBT is kind of taught from the perspective of invalidation, right? The idea is not just that you're simply going to validate it, is that hopefully, and I'm sure not everyone has had that particular experience, is that you want to embody and represent a different type of model. So the idea with that is that people are not, generally speaking, born confident, right? That's not something you're born with. And so the perspective that I really had and grew up with in terms of why this is a compelling field to me is because I don't believe that I necessarily would have been able to pursue and reach the types of things that I get to do if I didn't have that support. Right? If somebody didn't teach me how to be confident and how to struggle through things and figure them out and learn the skills, it changes your entire perspective. You can then develop a vision and pursue it and double down on it and invest in it and get other people to invest in you. Right? And so people are not born confident. And at the same time, you're also not born hating yourself. Now, you kind of have to learn to do that, and somebody has to teach you, right? Because people aren't born that way, right? You kind of have to get that from somewhere. You might be born sensitive, right? You might be born with certain disadvantages or vulnerabilities, but you're not born hating yourself, right? Again, that's something that kind of has to be taught. This is really silly because I have these on paper. I don't know. So how do you begin a conversation about life and death? The truth is you're not beginning it, right? You're entering a conversation that already exists, right? The person who wants to die, even those who engage in the behavior impulsively, have already been mulling this around for a little bit. They've been fighting with themselves, sometimes fighting with their environment, but even more than kind of the conversations that go back and forth with the person in their environment, their family, their friends, their peers, their teachers, whoever it is that gives a crap enough to kind of participate or that they want to pull into a conversation. It's a conversation that they're deeply involved with themselves. They might struggle for it for over a couple of years, right? Months, days, hours, right? It's a constant conversation for the person who wants to die, right? Sometimes you never leave it, and you can definitely go through different episodes of, long periods of time where you are struggling with it minute by minute. And many of us have experienced people who have either, been able to succeed in dying, but certainly people who have attempted, right? And that's part of that conversation where sometimes the feeling is that conversation has to end. I cannot tolerate that conversation anymore. But then there's the idea that they're sitting in front of you. So in that moment, they've decided to at least allow another person to participate in the conversation, right? But you should kind of know that you're not selling from zero, right? In that particular moment, you might be selling from a place of advantage or coming in because there's a sense of hope, right? Somebody said, hey, you know what, this particular person might be a good idea, right? They could probably help you, or they might be able to help you. They feel inspired. Sometimes they feel even inspired after a suicide attempt. Right? I did this and I really know I want to go for it. I wouldn't rely on this, right? But the idea that I made this attempt, but never again, right? And so sometimes a person comes in with hope, and just as likely they come in with, you know, dog shit, and they don't want to participate at all, and they're dragged in there, and they really believe that, you know, they ought to die. So just the knowledge and feeling of the responsibility, in some ways you can actually temper it. Right? The feeling of like, I have to convince somebody in a particular way is a little bit unfair, right? Because they've been convincing themselves back and forth for however long they've been playing the game. The idea is to think about what the obstacles are. And I can probably get a sense from you, and I think maybe it would be helpful if anybody wants to share, and you don't have to, and you can do it in a single word, of what you would identify the obstacles are for working with somebody who deeply and profoundly wants to die. Right, and having that particular conversation. Yeah. What's your name? I'm sorry.
Sarah.
Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Despair.
Despair. Terrific. Not for them. Yeah.
The fantasy that it's going to be relief.
Fantasy that's going to be relief. Excellent. Yeah.
Fear.
Fear. Fear. Just the therapist here.
Yeah.
A difficult environment that's difficult to change.
Excellent. Right, there's that part of it that I maybe can help you, but all the other surrounding things I don't get to participate in. Yeah.
Like a loss of shared meaning, like where it becomes them trying to prove their point, and then you become like the enemy trying to prove another point. Kind of like you're saying, like this sales thing, and then you're just like completely on different pages, and that the rapport's gone.
That adversarial feeling. Yeah.
How's your expectation to like save them? You want to
Like the feeling of responsibility to save them.
Yeah.
Shalom, you.
No, I just didn't hear what she said.
Oh, do you mind going again? It was a really good comment, so I
Like
think you should repeat
a
it.
loss of shared meaning, like when you're kind of like in flow with a client, even if it's challenging, but you feel like you're both, there's rapport, there's flow, and then when you get into this kind of conversation, and it becomes them against you, and you feel like you're like on different islands, and there's just that feeling of rupture.
Mm-hmm. So she was describing a lack of shared meaning, that you're coming from two totally different perspectives, two different islands of experience, and I think that's well said. What's up, brother?
I think it's a little bit connected to what Hadassah said and what you referred to in the beginning. How do you create that paradigm shift where they're coming in and there is no meaning, there is no sense of purpose? How do you, I mean, if you're caught up in skills,
Yeah.
it's sort of like water off a duck's back. If at the end of the day, what do we do? Like, why am I wasting my time? Why am I putting in all this effort? How do you create that shift? I mean, sometimes I just think it seems like an impossible chasm to be able to bridge, to get them over to the other side and to even see maybe there is something worthwhile here.
Yeah, that's all terrific. Does anybody have a last one before?
I find it very alone. And the concept that nobody wants them, and they're like extra to the world. They're one of the things that
Beautiful.
Yeah, I actually wasn't going to comment, but I want to comment now based on what you just said. And this is something important that I always remind people. When we speak about hopelessness and loneliness, what we need to remember, in my humble opinion, is that definition is not our definition of hopelessness and loneliness. It's their definition. Their definition of loneliness and hopelessness is very different than our normal understanding of what it is. So when you say, for example, what this lady said, feeling alone, that aloneness is not as we know it. It's as they know it. And it's very hard to relate and get there and be with them in that place.
Well said. Doesn't have to be your humble opinion. I think it was a strong one. So. Yeah.
There's also sometimes like a fatigue in the client of just so tired. I don't even want to I don't even want to work or like try.
Yeah. There's also, I think, oftentimes, like, you might be the 15th person that they've seen, and they, a tremendous, I think fatigue is the perfect word. Shoot to the front.
And I work with teenagers, so they're usually very annoyed of all these adults who are trying to push them somewhere, and sometimes they're different directions, so they're like hedgehogs.
Absolutely. So,
I know it sounds like weird, but like, what about curiosity? Like coming with the approach, just like instead of coming with like judgment, like this is wrong, like whatever, just being able to present curiosity to the client.
in terms of our response.
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah, perfectly well said. I'm gonna hit that. In terms of the obstacles, right? I think there are certain things that I would call content obstacles and affect obstacles, right? Content obstacles are a lot of the things that you mentioned, although many of you actually, I think, impressively mentioned affect obstacles as well. Content obstacles are certain thoughts or beliefs, and beliefs are non-truths, they're beliefs, right? There's no point to life. An emotion thing could be a content obstacle also. They're deeply hopeless, right? That's a content obstacle, right? That is a status of being. Their energy is one of hopelessness. There's a lack of vision, right? Which is going to be really important. The idea that they have no idea what the hell to do, right? The idea of something being different or compelling, right? It has a lack of vision. The idea, it's actually a skill. The idea that you can put together something that resembles, like, I can envision some type of life or some type of future. Sometimes it's concrete, like, medical doctors, some of them know they wanted to be doctors from the time that they were 5 years old. Like my older brother was putting stethoscopes on people, probably really annoyingly, from a very early age. But a lot of other people are, you're kind of going through some version of an adventure, right? Some people are in the status of not being able to be penetrated. And I would say one of the more profound content problems, which is also going to be a affect problem, is self-hatred or self-loathing, right? Self-hatred, Blaise Gary was on a podcast recently speaking about how he found that most of the attempted suicides and completed suicides that he's experienced, over 5,000 patients at McLean, that self-hatred was one of the core components, or possibly the core components, right? The idea of a deep and profound shame and hating of oneself. Then you have your affect problems. And the affect problems are what you experience in the room with the person, right? It's this thing that you kind of, like, through graduate school and through supervision, you become more in tune to, right? A diagnostic manual describes, for the most part, content problems, right? Things that are symptomatic, right? But a process problem, an affect problem, is what you experience when you're in the room with the person. And an affect problem is that a person could be incredibly irritable, right? In the room, they're irritable, right? They're standoffish, like, prove it to me, right? They kind of have that shitty attitude, right? Prove it to me, right? Standoffish, irritable, sometimes mean attitude, which I actually really find fun. They could be incredibly dismissive, right? The idea of, like, hey, you're just kind of sitting here, I'm sitting here for my parents, right? I'm participating in this, but this is really nothing to me, and you're nothing to me. Which, by the way, is a very strange way to meet somebody. Right? One of my first impressions is like, whatever you think of me, like, this is a very bizarre way to interact with a complete stranger. It's just not, and I think that is, like, an interesting shift. They can be incredibly depressed, almost, again, impenetrable because they are so down. And again, self-hatred, the idea of really embodying a tremendous amount of hatred of oneself, right? In the room, not just as this kind of, like, label of, like, this is where I am and this is a symptom. They experience a tremendous amount of self-hatred in the room and would almost have no understanding why you wouldn't hate them also, right? Again, even a weird expectation that I'm going to hate somebody whom I've never met, right? I'm perfectly willing to hate somebody I've met or I've heard of, but the idea I've never met you and that the expectation that I would hate you. Then there's also the kind of the affect problem of a person's actual desire, and this is, like, really in the room. And also sometimes what is described is a person's desire to die as an actual status of being. I really want to die. Life is horrible as it's lived. And then there's sometimes where they're including you into that fight that they've been having internally, which more so about how they might want to die in this particular moment, they definitely want to communicate that they want to die, right? Their ideation might not meet their intent and plan in that particular moment. In this moment, they might not want to die. but they definitely want to engage you in a conversation about how they want to die, right? The idea of that kind of prove it to me, right? Or you're so full of shit. I haven't met you, but I know you're full of shit in the same way that I expect you to hate me. There's this kind of, this anticipation, there's this belief and expectation about how this is going to roll. So it'll tell you a lot about the core variables you're ultimately going to hit. Because if you're dealing just with content problems, that might be all fine and well. That's a little bit of a presenting of a vision, right? But a communication problem is actually a lot more compelling, right? The idea that they're coming at you within a conversation, right? They're actually showing you maybe what they've been showing their environment, their parents, anybody else who's ever tried to help them, is they're presenting that we're going to talk about this. Yeah.
Just a quick question. I've always, I mean, for whatever it's worth, what I learned is that you say that they have that they express in the room this desire to die, this desire to take their lives. But in actuality, my understanding has been that they're doing that because they desire to live.
So I think you're bringing up a terrific point, because
And I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead to maybe something you want to say, I don't know.
listen, any help I can get is terrific. And I'm also making the assumption that you guys are participating in this because you're also skilled and gifted, and if not, that you will be. So, you know, I really do appreciate it. Yeah, by the very nature of the fact that they're in that room, they haven't killed themselves. At least in this moment, they've attended a meeting that they did not have to attend. Whether they were forced to or threatened to or bribed to, they are here and not dead in this particular moment. And so they're at least giving it, you know, some version of the old college try in that particular instance. Yeah.
Can I describe it as a polarization, that pull between wanting to live and wanting to die?
Yes, that's like the perfect DBT type of language without being annoying and calling a dialectic all the time. I would say that's a way I'd prefer. I really try to find language that's not that, because also enough people have been through some version of it that you almost become inoculated to it. So I appreciate the terminology. I think it's better, and I'll steal it. And I'll cite somebody that hopefully I'll get the name of later. Then there's also, I think with it, there's emotional pain that a person is experiencing, right? Both content and affect. And the idea that if you think about that other component of communicating that you want to die, but actually pulling for something. Sometimes, by the way, communicating that you want to die, you get a response from the environment. Whether you intend to provoke or you do not, it is provocative, right? The idea of expressing how much pain you're in and you want to die will provoke, hey, what's up, Rock? Will provoke some type of reaction, right? That's kind of the very nature of that experience, right? And so sometimes you find that conversation is socially reinforced. And so that could be the exact same thing that you present in a room, is that there's going to be some version of expectation that me being a person who's suicidal and deeply wants to die is going to generate something from you, right? Otherwise, a person might silently want to die, but they wouldn't talk so goddamn much about it, right? The idea of that means that it's in some way just behaviorally being maintained or increased by behavioral definition, right? If reinforcement is the idea that there's a consequence that increases the likelihood of behavior, then if you're talking about it a lot, something's reinforcing it, right? And it could be internal or it could be external. Yeah.
I think that threat is another thing that is really important to acknowledge, and like the transparency.
Do me one more time. Just a little louder.
The threat that creates is a really important thing to also acknowledge, and like the transference that it creates, and how if somebody's only ever been heard or noticed when they said this or actually attempted it, like I've always found that like I don't want to accidentally push them to do it, because like striking the balance between really holding space for them with compassion and patience, and not trying to talk them out of it doesn't like aggravate that part that's like, oh my gosh, doesn't realize how serious I am. She's another person who's not listening, so I'm going to go and like show her and show the world.
Yeah, although I'm going to adopt a slightly different perspective, but I think that there's we're going to use the polarization terminology. There's a strong part of you that's very much on point. The next phase of it, and I think that oftentimes, because somebody mentioned fear as being one of the obstacles, that it could be a scary conversation because you might screw it up and maybe you're going to feel that that's the reason why they're going to kill themselves, or that at the very least you had an opportunity and you swung and you missed, right? And there's a feeling of responsibility, which is fair. But dealing with a person who wants to die and trying to have that conversation is a problem like any other, right? It's a problem of serious consequence, right? The stakes are high, but it can be framed as a problem, right? The idea is that, thank God, somebody thought of enough solutions, and this is why I found myself attracted to this particular modality, because I got into this kind of by accident, is because somebody went the distance and tried to figure out what are all the reasons why somebody would want to die, and what are all the things that would make them a pain in the ass about having a conversation about it, right? The idea is what would make that difficult. The idea that somebody tried to attend to all the different elements of that conversation means that somebody saw it as a problem that could be solved, rather than something that hopefully you get lucky on. There's even just the idea of it is like, if I offered somebody $5, if somebody said, I'm really, really hungry, and I gave you $5, right? That's a problem, and a better solution is to buy a sandwich, right? Somebody might buy a lottery ticket and win $5 million, but that's not a really great approach to things, right? The idea is that if you want to solve a problem, there's a way of kind of generating it out versus I'm going to shoot for the stars and shoot the moon and get some type of big hope, and that's what you're relying on. The idea is that it's a problem. One of the first things you want to get a sense of, and I think somebody stated it quite nicely in the back, right, is to identify what is making life painful. Right? In order to solve a problem, I want to deeply understand it. I want to be curiosity was the word that you used. I want to be curious about it. Right? I want to understand the beliefs. I want to understand what your emotional pain is like. Regarding yourself, regarding the environment, and I actually want you guys to steal this terminology. One of the things that I refer to constantly, and the idea of what I definitely present in an intake is I want to understand what it's like to experience life like you. Right? I don't ask you straight up about what are your problems. You experience life in a particular way, right? You want to die, she wants to die, I want to die, but you have a particular narrative, right? You're anxious, I'm anxious. Right? There's a way that you experience that, and the direction that we're going to go in, or we have the opportunity to go in, is going to be based on your experience of that problem. Right? You experience this particular phenomena in a unique way, and so we have to capture that as much as possible. And in a given moment, what is it like to experience this moment as you? Right? Versus you are a person with a series of problems. Right? It becomes a lot more of an engaging and I would say intriguing conversation. Because that's not a way that question is usually phrased when you're trying to get that information. And so I actually beg you to steal it because I think it really works. The other idea becomes like, how did you learn that self-hate, right? If we have the assumption that people are not born either hating themselves or loving themselves or feeling confident that you have to learn it, right? How did you learn it, right? You may have learned it because you tried a lot of things and they didn't work out, and they're things that people ought to be good at and you failed at it a lot. Right? It could be that you got that response from your environment, that you are no good and there is clearly something wrong with you, either because they've said it outright or because they've hinted at it, and if you're sensitive enough, they don't need to say it outright, right? You just pick it up. And what I would say is really important because oftentimes people present content, right? It's so logical, like why would anybody want to be in this particular world, right? That's a logic-based argument. If we're using DBT terminology, right, that's kind of logic mind. They're saying, work out this calculative concept to me, right? Prove to me that, life could be worth living. They'll never use that language unless they're being annoying, right? Prove to me that, life is worth it, right? And what I would say that it's worthwhile to shift to is immediately shift into emotion mind, right? Because when the person sits with that in their room, they're not budgeting it out and writing it out and making a checkbook out of it, right? It's a deeply emotional experience, and you want to try to draw it out. Right? The idea of what is the emotion behind it. And I would say there are a lot of different ways to do it, including what I'll get to, which is sometimes being confrontational. The idea of what you want to match with, right? The idea of how to have this particular conversation it's active, right? Some of it is curious, right? In order to validate, I have to understand it, right? The idea of kind of empty validation of like, oh, that must be really hard. Yeah, sometimes that's a fair phrase, right? But the idea is I want to be as specific as possible. And so my main validation in an assessment is curiosity, right? I don't validate something specific unless I understand it because it's cheap and they know it, right? They've heard empty validation, right? The idea is that I want to be curious enough, like, hey, let me get a sense of it, right? And I would say be matter of fact. And the reason why is that whenever you're gathering information about a problem, you're usually fairly matter of fact about it. You're not deeply emotional, and you're not necessarily even mirroring them exactly. In fact, if I were to mirror them, I would be a little bit off center, right? Because I'm actually not where you're at. I'm where you're at enough that I want to understand you, but I'm not going to sit exactly where you're at because we're going to have to move somewhere else, right? So I want to be curious, but not exactly in there totally with you because I'm representing something different than you, right? The idea is to also be bold, right? And in some ways, people will feel like whether you have the permission to do so. And so there are people, I guess, more credentialed than I that would say, be bold and don't be afraid to destabilize, right? The idea is that you in some way need to destabilize your patient. Otherwise, they will be stuck in this narrative and they are controlling you, right? The idea is that you have to create ultimately some type of shift with your demeanor, with your questions, that gives an opportunity for them to be a little bit less on track. And the idea of that is, in DBT, they call that movement, speed, and flow, right? Which is a demeanor thing, which I think comes through a lot of supervision and a lot of assistance and a lot of consultation and really trying yourself out a little bit, taking your mind and body for a spin. Right? The idea of movement, speed, and flow is that I can be with you in this particular moment, but in the next moment, I'm going to shift you out of there. Right? DBT is an active treatment. Even your assessment is active. Right? There are a lot of questions. There's a lot of conversation. I'm not just asking a question and hearing an entire narrative, because when you've actually wanted to understand something from a friend, you're active. You don't sit there like a gnome, right? You participate, right? And so sometimes if you're going to ask a real question that's meaningful, you run the risk of destabilization. And the interesting thing is that a person who wants to die and is very sensitive, at the same time wants to be understood and wants somebody to understand them and to be sensitive with them and be with them, but they actually don't want to be treated as fragile, right? And they know when they are, and it's patronizing, and it's kind of shitty, right? It's not a nice way to interact with somebody. The idea of, rather than kind of believing that there's a version of you that's stronger, and even if you're not there, I'm going to act a little bit like you are. So be bold, and in a certain type of conversation, don't be afraid to destabilize, because interesting questions could be destabilizing, right? You've had a particular narrative that's been running all along, and through a particular question, I might challenge a little bit and ask you to think about it differently, and I might not even wait for an answer, right? It might be the idea of like, you know what? I'm not sure I would think about it that way, but let's come back to it. That's cool, right? It's a little bit of destabilization, right? Like I hear what you're saying. Let's come back to that idea because I think you're off on one thing, right? A little bit you've put a penny in the track, right? There's something that kind of compels them in the fact that you're not necessarily being provoked in the same way that everybody else is, right? Because you're calm, you're matter of fact. It's a conversation that is actually interesting to get into and becomes more interesting for everybody. So in the beginning, there's interest, there's assessment, there's curiosity, there's validation, right? There's also doing that from a fairly matter-of-fact place because that's the way that you actually deal with most problems in your life with most people, including friends and family who have problems as well. And that's also the way you want to be treated, right? You don't want somebody, putting a pillow under you just because you have a deep problem, right? You might want that pillow, but you also might want that confidence and that nudge. So be afraid. Don't be afraid to destabilize. I think the other thing is to find a way to laugh, right? One, if you can get somebody to laugh when they've been suicidal, that changes the entire game. It really does, because then they can never say that they didn't laugh, right? They had a different experience. And the interesting thing is that if you like what you do, one of the main benefits is that not every day, but on most days, when a person works with me, they get to see somebody that loves what they do, that enjoys it, that finds it fun. People say, like, aren't conversations with people that are really depressed and really want to die, don't you feel really depressed? And I say, no, it's fun. It could be a very fun, engaging conversation because people who want to die are funny. They are funny. They have senses of humor. They have dark humor, right? They have really dark humor, and it's kind of funny. And you can engage in that, and they get to experience two things that are important, right? A lot of people that want to die experience other people as not wanting to be with them, that are not interested in being with them because you're too sensitive, you're really annoying, right? You make this conversation and this relationship really difficult. But in that room, you can be and represent somebody that actually wants to spend time with you, right? Yeah, I'm going to get paid for it, and it's going to be an hour. I'm going to move on to the next thing. But in this hour, you're going to feel like you're with somebody that wants to spend time with you. And if I don't want to spend time with you, I'll try to tell you why non-judgmentally. If a person says like, I suck and nobody wants to hang out with me, part of the being bold and being destabilizing is saying like, oh, yeah, I can kind of get that because you're not so nice. You haven't been nice to me, right? I don't particularly enjoy you. I think I could though, because you've been funny every once in a while. And even your pain has a little bit of cleverness, right? You're always trying to draw out some type of positive thing that could be reinforced. That's basically saying, I kind of enjoy being here with you, right? And if I don't, I'm going to make it something enjoyable. And that's not an experience that a lot of people who want to die get to have, right? In this time, we're going to try to enjoy ourselves at least somewhat. And it is really important because what is reinforcing? If you think about any particular date, I think that sometimes they feel that, or one can feel, all of us can feel, that if something is depressing, that means it's more profound, right? That means it's deeper. And I think it's horseshit. I don't agree. From the bottom of my heart, I don't agree, right? I think silliness is one of the most beautiful things on planet Earth. Fun is amazing. Otherwise, why would we be shooting for it? It's the idea of, oh, people are having fun, therefore it's empty and vapid. I loathe that idea, right? Life should be interesting. Life should be compelling. Conversations should be fun. Not all of them, right? But things that are profound oftentimes are also really happy. People write happy songs in the same way that they write sad love ballads, right? People who get the girl are also fairly interesting, and you kind of want to know how they did it. So be bold. Don't be afraid to destabilize. Find a way to laugh and enjoy your time with them, right? It's really important because now they get to experience somebody liking them, right? And at the very least, if you don't like them, you can tell them specifically why, right? It's not because I have to experience you this way, and I didn't experience you this way 100%. There's a whole percentage of things that I experienced that were actually kind of cool. The next idea is, Witaki, how are we on time? What am I supposed to go to? All right, we're good. The next important thing, I think this has to do with training and supervision and consultation, and I'll identify that 3 out of 4 of the other people on my team are here. The idea of believing you can help them requires a certain degree of support. I think like through supervision, I really try to have the idea on my team that we're in the game together, win, lose, or draw. I really believe that. I don't have a problem with people making mistakes. That's all in the game, right? And that in a lot of ways reinforces the idea that they could be helped. The consultation team is based on the concept that things are going to go poorly, not well. Right? When I describe it to people, it's the idea of that things are not going to go well. That's why I have support, right? And that's why hopefully they have theirs also. And this way we can all experience getting to do this thing that you love and having people see it, right? That's the way you should experience work. And so you have to believe that you can help them, right? You have to somehow come to a place, if it's going to work and they don't need some other level of care, right? You have to embody somebody that really believes that you can help them, and you have to have some type of reason why, both in your general quality and personality, right? That you actually can get to a place where you believe it because you have the skill and because they've represented something that's worthy of double clicking on, right? That there is something there that means that you can help them. And so then you want to identify why they're worthy of belief and why they're worthy of investment. And the reason I use the word investment is because it's not a favor, it's a partnership. Right? My expectation of every single patient that works with me is that they're going to make it as easy as possible for me to treat them. Right? It is a patient's responsibility to make my job as easy as possible. There's this comedian, her name's Whitney Cummings, and I mean, she has a really filthy style to her, but she was on a podcast and she said something really profound. She said, I was dating this professional athlete, and he's being a professional athlete, and it's, even though we don't necessarily think about it like that, there's glory, but it's really hard work to get to stay in the league, right? He's working hard, he's sweating, he's getting yelled at by coaches, right? And we were fighting a lot. And I said to him, you know what? I'm a challenge, right? And if you want to be in this relationship, you're going to have to deal with the challenge. And she said, he responded to me, why would I want to be challenged by my girlfriend? Why would that be the experience I want to have? And she said, it completely rocked my world, because I thought being challenging was sexy and fun and would bring something out of them and it would increase intrigue. And I disagree. And she eventually came to the place of that as well. It should be as easy as possible for me to treat you. It should be as easy as possible for your parents to parent you, right? the idea that it's the same thing as the Marine Corps idea, is that there's an investment in a partnership. You are responsible, and rather than thinking that people will be like, hey, no, I'm out of it, the same thing with the Marine Corps idea in the beginning is that they become intrigued. They become interested. Because if I believe that you are responsible, that means I also believe in you, right? And I'll say it with a full heart, right? The idea is that on the validation side, the being bold part is saying you are absolutely suffering. I say this probably in almost every meeting that comes up, is that it is very clear that you're suffering. There's no question you're suffering. And your suffering is unacceptable. Right? I find your suffering to be unacceptable. There's another version of life, right, that is magia lacha, magia lach, whatever it is, right? But this is unacceptable. And I believe it could be different. And the only question is whether I'm going to have a partner, right? If you're not willing to partner with me, hey, listen, I hear it. Right? You don't have to do it, right? If you're interested, I'll be waiting at the back. And it happens to be, I never have somebody agree to therapy and I agree to work with them in the room. I want to find out from your mouth why you are now interested, why you are now intrigued enough and compelled enough to be my partner, because I'm going to expect something from you, right? And the idea is that actually that intrigue creates engagement. Now, still oftentimes, just like in the beginning, they want to know why you would feel that way. And sometimes it could be based on, and this feels sometimes hollow, is I've worked with a lot of people, right? Blazer Gary would say, I work with 5, he actually doesn't in that way. He just kind of cites it as experience. But I worked with a lot of people and I've shown X amount of success. And, hopefully that's true. I think that sometimes, and this comes with self-disclosure, because again, it is a relationship of equals. It's a reciprocal relationship. That's what a partnership is. I have a responsibility in a different way than you in this partnership, but it is a partnership. And so I do owe you something, which is, why would I believe? Why do I believe in general, and why do I potentially believe in you? I tell a particular story, not all the time, but often enough, about why I'm willing to believe. And it meets the personal to the clinical. And the story I tell is like this. My grandfather was describing to me what it was like when he got liberated from the camps. And he was describing it to me, and I asked him, I'm like, hey, Saba, did you ever think about killing yourself? Because I'm in this field, and I felt it was an interesting question. And he said, listen, I've thought about it at times, but it wasn't, I don't know, wasn't such a thing that people maybe did so much. I don't know. And, it was, I don't know, I don't think he had that much life experience because, he was either in Cheder or, in Plushev. So, I mean, how many people do you get to talk to about, these type of things? But nevertheless, he said, I thought of it, and he described an interesting phenomena. He said, when I got liberated from the camps, it wasn't just my whole family was dead. Everybody I had ever met on planet Earth was dead. Right? I didn't know anybody on Earth. Right? What a crazy statement, because you think of people like, oh my God, yeah, they lost their whole family. He lost everybody on Earth. He doesn't know any people. You get released from the camp. He actually describes even more so. They were liberated by the Soviets, and the commandant of the Soviet army that came said, listen, everyone should thank Comrade Stalin and the Soviet army and the party and my grandfather's like, yeah, whatever, like food. Well, thank whoever you want, right? There's nothing, right? And the word he described that he said, I was Hefker. I was completely ownerless. You lose your watch somewhere, on the beach. It's a weekend. You have no hope of ever retrieving it, right? No one's looking for me, right? I am completely and utterly Hefker. I know nobody on Earth. And so I thought about killing myself for a little bit. I don't know how deeply, but I kicked it around a little bit. That's not the words he used. But I thought about it for a bit. And then I figured I can always do it tomorrow. Let me see what happens, right? And I don't think that the family that he created is a replacement for the family that he lost. I don't think that's fair. There's still a tremendous amount of pain, right? But it's hard the idea that you can have somebody that is completely ownerless, that knows no people on Earth, and was able to make, even if a painful, a very compelling and interesting life, right, means that there's reason for hope. That's something that I kind of sit on, because it's somebody I knew. It's at least in concept. It checks every box of emotional and content experience that you could be down to nothing, right? Nothing emotionally, nothing in content, and still play the game, right? Which is why I don't actually know what's going to become of you, right? I'm willing to have a partnership and an adventure because I have enough reason personally to believe that something could be made out of this, right? And I don't have to know what it is, right? I get to experience that with you. And so the idea is that you want to identify and help them identify, even with that, like, hey, listen, you're kind of articulate and you're kind of funny and you're interesting, right? You seem worthy of investment. I'm willing to. And here's the reasons why I think you might have hope. Not because I actually know what's going to happen. And whether you're religious, not religious, all this kind of stuff is not my jurisdiction. That doesn't really matter to me, but we get to explore it. And even realize that a lot of the reasons why you experience life as so painful and you're so hopeless is because you don't know how to do anything. Right? If you don't know how to do things, you come out with a very profound experience of shame and self-hatred because you experience life as I don't know how to do things. The example I always give is that a teacher teaches their class and says, you have an exam on Thursday, study chapters 1, 2, and 3. It makes a profound miscalculation, and that's the idea that people know how to study. Studying is a skill, right? The idea of somebody actually knowing how to do that, it's not something a teacher ever does. And maybe that's not their role. It probably ought to be, right? But what ends up happening is that people that are otherwise capable of learning end up failing because they didn't learn this other skill. And you come out feeling stupid and you find yourself completely incapable and potentially unworthy. And then you shut off options. Why? Because you didn't learn a skill, and that becomes part of your personality. Right? I can't learn. I can't do something, and every experience has reinforced it because I don't know how to do stuff. I don't know how to do that skill. I don't know how to regulate. There's so many things that a person doesn't know how to do because they were never taught. But if you are taught, if you learn how to do it, you have the opportunity to experience life as if you knew how to study. Right? And the studying person, maybe you have ADHD or some type of learning disability, which, okay, we have to be more creative. In the same way, we have to be more creative with you than anybody else has ever been. Right? You're going to have to learn things with it, but it's a partnership. Right? We get to have this thing together and go on an adventure. And what I would say is that it's probably no different than the way that you interact with and try to cultivate relationships in the future with your loved ones. It's the same idea, hopefully. The same experience that, hopefully it's the experience that I got to have as a kid, where you have difficulties, you have challenges, you have strengths and weaknesses, and you hopefully have a unit, right, and a system that cares enough to invest in you, right, and wants to draw you in as a partner. And so when you have that, you have a much more intriguing conversation. And then you get to decide what you want them in the back of the room, right? We'll connect in 2 days and we'll see what you feel. I expect you to have more questions, and then we'll see what's up, right? But the idea is that gets to be a much more intriguing conversation, not because you said, I believe that you can absolutely have a great life. I don't know. But I've actually, to my experience, never seen somebody work really hard and earnestly that hasn't made something compelling. And it's actually the people that I've worked with that have most wanted to die that I've stayed most in touch with, right? The people that have been challenged the most. I actually have people I've seen in my office. I have somebody made me a construction paper booklet of all the meanest things I've ever said to them, right? And it's this great booklet. We stay in contact. I actually wrote a letter for her for the Army. She asked me to write her letter to go, and I said, listen, this person can absolutely have a meaningful service. I underlined it, under no circumstances should she have a firearm. And she texted me 6 months later, she's now a shooting instructor, which is deeply irresponsible, and it means that maybe they don't read these letters that I put effort into. But nevertheless, she went, farther and in a different direction than I would have necessarily sought. So kudos to her, right? It's a testament to something very, very cool. So I'm open for questions, both now and otherwise. Yeah.
So like you said, people weren't born hating themselves.
Yeah.
It was hard earned, and they also don't want to let go of that belief so easily, or that self-hatred.
Yeah.
So when you say to someone, hey, your suffering is unacceptable, you deserve better, I imagine lots of people would recoil and even not want to hear that.
I don't know if you deserve better.
Okay?
Wouldn't it be interesting to become the type of person that deserves better?
No,
Really?
don't say that to me. I need to hold on to that self-hatred. I don't want to hear that from you.
Okay. You don't have to hear that from me.
Okay?
I'm presenting a perspective. You can buy or not buy, right? The idea, because very often what that actually is it's that prove it to me, right? If I find you to be kind of adopting that attitude, hey, listen, you're adopting an attitude in this that doesn't sound like an actual question. That sounds a little bit like a fuck off, right? If you want to ask me a real question, we can have a real conversation, right? But if it's this other thing where you're trying to kind of prove something to me, that's not terribly open, right? And it's standoffish, which is a weird way to act to a stranger, right? It's terribly impolite. It is. It's terribly impolite. And can I tell you the most interesting clinical thing that I find is that people really don't like being weird. They don't like being weird publicly. They don't like being unreasonable in a way that's like, hey, like, I'm being friendly, man. Like, we can do this. You can decide to do whatever the hell you want. It's not the idea that you must be convinced by me is not a fair expectation of either of us. Right? If you want to talk, we can talk. We can really talk, and that's cool. But if that's the type of that, you didn't really ask a question there, friend.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you did something else. You didn't ask a question. It sounded like a question. Your voice went up, but it wasn't a question. Yeah.
Sounds like, just to follow up on this, you're going more for giving them an experience with you.
Yeah.
Is one that is intriguing and gets them interested in life.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to convince them with some argument that their beliefs are wrong.
Right. And here's the thing is that I do sometimes believe that your beliefs are wrong. I don't know that I have to like prove it to you exactly now. I don't have to come up with a thesis about why this is wrong.
Challenge them, challenging them, and then in the room with you, that helps them to experience that they're beliefs
Correct.
wrong, rather than just intellectually trying to show them that it's wrong.
Correct, because here's what I know. One, you think that you're so pathetic, but you also think that you captured the entire universe in a sentence. Right? The idea that your perspective is so star-spangled amazing and everybody else is dumb and hasn't come to it. Right? There could be something that you're missing. There could be something I'm missing too. Right? That I'm perfectly willing because you have a unique experience. And if you believe that, there's probably a reason why. Right? But the idea that like you suck, but you also have it totally hammered home, like, I don't know. You haven't convinced me. Right? Yeah.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit.
I love it.
Okay. What if someone, their life is not worth living? They have schizophrenia, have Asperger's, their life, they have not a supportive family, their life, it sucks. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do then? How could I sell life to someone whose life, and not only that, I don't see such a good future either. I could lie to them. I could say, you know, but at the end of the day, what's going to be your life? You're going to go in and out of hospitals. You're going to be in like hostelli, like what is, you're going to get fat from what you're having. Like
No, I mean, listen, you described several different versions of a life that feels not worth living. Right? So one, we've already begun a game where it's kind of relative. Right? There are people with schizophrenia that, as in, I just have to show an alternative. But the real thing is that I really have to demonstrate an adventure. I don't know what version, I just believe that it's possible. Now, could there be something that breaks my very conception of it? And it's not to say that, by the way, if I was in your experience, I wouldn't be dabbling with what you are. That would be unfair. It's like, hey, I have so many resources that I would never consider it. That's insane, right? Because there might be something that would drive me to the exact place that you're at, right? But as a matter of course, right, the idea would be, can we go on an adventure together? You might come to a different conclusion or the exact same one, right? What I'm presenting is an adventure, right? Not an exact answer that is prophetic of how things must be or an exact idea of how I'm going to convince you. I'll give you an example of this from what I think is like more of a healthy perspective. My daughter came to me a couple years ago, and it's kind of the experience of a lot of us as Olim, that Yom Ha'atzmaut we have a particular relationship to it. And she had said, listen, Abba, I think I want to make Aliyah also. It was it's such a meaningful experience. I was like, listen, we don't run that experiment back. That's not like something we try again, because it didn't have to work out. But that's also not your thing. That's not going to be your thing. And she said, what's my thing? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what your thing is, right? I want to guide you with particular values that hopefully you connect to. And I definitely want to give you skill that you can participate in and get to do really cool things. But I have no idea what's going to be meaningful later. I don't know what the adventure is going to be, because that's going to emerge from you and whatever the world looks like. And the idea that I'm not going to be able to know that now. Right? So I don't know what it looks like. The idea is just, are we going to be partners on an adventure together? Can you be have a much more compelling schizophrenic life? All right, Saki called me off. Really, really great to see you guys. Hopefully get to meet you all through the course of the day.